The rain tapped against the windows of Blue Moon Coffee Shop, like tiny fingers trying to get inside. It was Tuesday evening, just past 7 o'clock, and the warm yellow lights inside made everything feel cozy and safe. The smell of fresh coffee, beans mixed with cinnamon rolls filled the air, creating that perfect coffee shop atmosphere that made people want to stay for hours. In the far corner, tucked away behind a tall bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, sat a young man hunched over his laptop. His name was Jake, and he had claimed this exact spot as his own for the past 3 months. Same table, same time, same black coffee with no sugar. The barista, Mrs. Chen, didn't even ask for his order anymore. She just started making his usual drink the moment she saw him walk through the door. Jake pulled his gray hoodie tighter around his shoulders, even though the coffee shop was perfectly warm. These days he wore hoodies everywhere, like armor protecting him from the world. His dark hair fell across his forehead, creating another barrier between himself and everyone else. He had become a master at making himself invisible, and this corner table was his fortress. His laptop screen glowed with a half-finished design project for a local restaurant. Jake worked as a freelance graphic designer, which was perfect for someone who preferred to avoid human contact. He could work from anywhere, talk to clients, through email, and never have to pretend he was okay when he wasn't. The cursor blinked on his screen, waiting for him to continue working, but Jake's mind kept wandering. It had been doing that a lot lately. He would start thinking about colors and fonts, and somehow end up remembering conversations from months. Ego words that still stung, promises that had been broken like cheap glass. He took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. It had gone cold while he was lost in thought. This happened every night. He would order the coffee, sit down with good intentions to work, and then spend most of the time staring at nothing, trapped in his own head. The coffee shop was almost empty tonight. Besides Jake, there was only Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who came in every evening to read his newspaper and complain about the weather to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Chen was behind the counter, wiping down already clean surfaces and humming softly to herself. Jake liked it this way. Quiet, predictable, safe. He had discovered this place by accident one rainy night when his apartment felt too small and too full of memories. He had walked for hours, not caring where he ended up, until he saw the warm lights of Blue Moon Coffee Shop calling to him like a lighthouse in a storm. That first night he had sat at a different table near the window, but it felt too exposed. People walking by could see him, and he didn't want to be seen. Not anymore. The corner table was perfect. Hidden behind books, facing the wall, with a clear view of both the front door and the back exit. 2 escape routes just in case. Not that he expected trouble, but these days Jake planned for everything that could go wrong. Life had taught him that happiness was temporary, but pain could last forever if you let it. His phone buzzed with a text message. Jake glanced at the screen and saw it was from his sister asking if he wanted to join the family for dinner this weekend. He stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside without responding. He would answer later, maybe tomorrow, with some excuse about being busy with work. The truth was, Jake wasn't ready to sit around a dinner table and pretend everything was fine. He wasn't ready to answer questions about his life or explain why he looked so tired all the time. His family meant well, but their concern felt heavy, like a blanket that was too warm on a summer day. He turned back to his laptop and tried to focus on the restaurant logo he was designing. The client wanted something modern but welcoming, professional but friendly. Jake understood the concept, but executing it felt impossible. How do you create something warm and inviting when you've forgotten what those things feel like? The bell above the front door chimed, its cheerful sound cutting through the quiet evening air. Jake didn't look up. He had trained himself not to react to every little sound, every movement, every possibility that someone might notice him. His world had become very small, limited to the space between his laptop screen and the coffee cup that he forgot to drink. But something was different tonight. He could sense it in the way Mrs. Chen's humming stopped, in the way the atmosphere in the coffee shop seemed to shift slightly, like the air before a thunderstorm. Even Mr. Peterson looked up from his newspaper, adjusting his glasses to get a better look at whoever had just walked in. Jake's fingers hovered over his keyboard, frozen mid-sentence. Every instinct told him to keep his eyes down, to stay invisible, to maintain the careful distance he had built between himself and the rest of the world. But there was something magnetic about the energy that had just entered the room, something that made his carefully constructed walls feel suddenly fragile. He could hear footsteps on the wooden floor, confident and unhurried. Not the quick, apologetic steps of someone trying not to disturb others, but the steady rhythm of someone completely comfortable in their own skin. It had been so long since Jake had felt that kind of confidence that he had almost forgotten it existed. The footsteps moved closer to the counter, and Jake heard Mrs. Chen's voice brighten in a way it rarely did during the quiet evening hours. Whoever this was, they had the kind of presence that made people smile without trying. Jake's curiosity fought against his need to remain hidden. Part of him wanted to look up to see who had brought this sudden energy into his quiet sanctuary. But the larger part, the part that had been protecting him for months, kept his eyes firmly fixed on his screen. He had become an expert at existing, without really living, at filling his days with just enough activity to avoid thinking too deeply about how empty they had become. This coffee shop visit was part of that routine, a way to be around people without actually engaging with them, to feel less alone without risking actual connection. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the careful balance he had maintained for months seemed to be shifting like a house of cards in a gentle breeze, and deep down in a place he had tried to lock away, Jake felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The sound of a leather jacket being unzipped cut through the quiet evening air. Jake's fingers paused over his keyboard as he heard the soft rustle of fabric, followed by the gentle thud of something being placed on a nearby table. His peripheral vision caught a glimpse of movement, but he kept his eyes glued to his laptop screen like his life depended on it. Mrs. Chen's voice rang out cheerfully from behind the counter. "The usual, Luna. Medium caramel latte with an extra shot." "You know me too well," came the reply, and Jake felt something strange happen in his chest. The voice was warm and clear, with a hint of laughter dancing around the edges. It was the kind of voice that made you want to look up, to see who it belonged to understand what kind of person could sound so completely at ease in the world. But Jake had spent months perfecting the art of not looking up, not engaging, not risking anything that might crack the protective shell he had built around himself. So he stared harder at his screen, at the restaurant logo that seemed to blur slightly around the edges. He could hear her moving around the coffee shop with an easy confidence that seemed foreign to him now. Her footsteps weren't rushed or apologetic like most people who came in during the evening hours. They were steady and purposeful, like she belonged wherever she chose to be. "How's the art class going?" Mrs. Chen asked while the espresso machine hummed to life. "Really well, actually. The kids are starting to believe in themselves, which is the hardest part. Once they stop being afraid of making mistakes, the real magic happens." An art teacher. Jake filed this information away without meaning to. Like his brain was collecting puzzle pieces he didn't want to put together. He tried to refocus on his work, but the conversation continued to drift over to his corner. "That's wonderful, dear. You have such a gift for bringing out the best in people." Jake heard Luna laugh softly. "I think everyone has something beautiful inside them. Sometimes they just need someone to help them see it." The words hit Jake harder than they should have. When was the last time someone had seen anything beautiful in him? When was the last time he had seen anything beautiful in himself? The question stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. So he pushed them away and typed a random sentence into his design notes just to make his fingers move. The espresso machine stopped humming, and Jake could hear Mrs. Chen preparing the drink. The familiar sounds of coffee shop routine usually comforted him, but tonight they seemed louder somehow, more noticeable, like someone had turned up the volume on his life just slightly. "There you go, sweetie. Extra hot, just how you like it." "You're an angel, Mrs. Chen." "Thank you." Jake heard footsteps again, but this time they didn't head toward the door or to one of the tables near the front windows. Instead, they seemed to be moving in his direction. His shoulders tensed automatically, and he hunched further over his laptop, making himself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped, and Jake could sense someone nearby. Not close enough to be intrusive, but definitely within his awareness. He could smell something pleasant, maybe vanilla perfume mixed with the faint scent of paint that seemed to cling to creative people like a badge of honor. Minutes passed in silence. Jake kept typing nonsense into his document, deleting it and typing more. His usual hiding technique wasn't working tonight. Instead of feeling invisible, he felt hyper-aware of everything around him. The way the rain had started tapping harder against the windows. The way Mr. Peterson was rustling his newspaper more than usual. The way his own breathing seemed too loud in the quiet space. Finally, curiosity won the battle against caution. Jake lifted his eyes from his screen for just a second, intending to glance quickly around the coffee shop and then return to his work. Instead, his gaze collided with something he wasn't prepared for. She was looking directly at him. Not a casual glance that would slide away when caught. Not an accidental meeting of eyes across a crowded room. This was deliberate, intentional, and completely unashamed. Luna sat at a table that gave her a perfect line of sight to his corner hideout. Her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her attention focused entirely on him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to look away immediately, to break the connection and retreat back into his safe shell of isolation. But something about her gaze held him frozen. It wasn't aggressive or uncomfortable. It was simply present. Like she had been waiting for this moment and was glad it had finally arrived. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, perfect way that magazines taught people to expect. Her beauty was real and approachable, with laugh lines around her eyes and paint smudges on her fingers that suggested a life lived fully and without apology. Her dark hair was pulled back in a casual bun with a few strands framing her face, and she wore a simple green sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. But it wasn't her appearance that held Jake captive. It was the way she looked at him. Like she could see past his defensive posture and his carefully constructed walls. Like she knew something about him that even he had forgotten. There was no judgment in her expression, no pity or curiosity about why he was hiding in the corner like a wounded animal. There was just acceptance and something that looked surprisingly like recognition. Jake felt his carefully maintained composure start to crack. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, forgetting that it had gone cold hours ago. The bitter taste made him wince, but he couldn't look away from Luna's steady gaze. She didn't smile or wave or do any of the things people usually did when they made eye contact with a stranger. She just continued to look at him with that same calm intensity, like she was reading a book she found particularly interesting. Jake had the unsettling feeling that she could see chapters of his story that he had tried to keep hidden, even from himself. Time seemed to stretch in strange ways. What was probably only a few seconds felt like hours, and Jake found himself cataloging details he hadn't noticed in months. The way the light from the coffee shop windows reflected in Luna's eyes. The soft sound of her breathing. The way she held herself with such genuine confidence that it made his own insecurities feel suddenly obvious and uncomfortable. He wanted to look away. Every instinct screamed at him to break this connection, to return to the safety of his laptop screen and the familiar comfort of isolation. But something stronger than fear kept his eyes locked on hers. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the recognition that this moment was important in ways he couldn't yet understand. Luna took a slow sip of her coffee, never breaking eye contact. The simple action felt loaded with meaning, like she was saying something without words. Jake found himself studying her face, looking for clues about what she wanted, why she was here, why she was looking at him like he was worth looking at. For the first time in months, Jake felt truly seen. And terrifying as it was, he realized he didn't want her to look away. What happened next wasn't exactly a conversation. It was something deeper, something that lived in the space between words and glances. Luna didn't get up from her table or try to walk over to introduce herself. She didn't wave or smile or do any of the normal things people do when they want to start talking to someone. Instead, she just kept looking at Jake with that same steady, patient attention, like she had all the time in the world. Jake felt his heart beating faster in his chest. This was completely outside his comfort zone, and every part of him wanted to pack up his laptop and run. But something kept him frozen in place. Maybe it was curiosity about what would happen if he stayed. Maybe it was the realization that he had been running from connections for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly interested in another person. Minutes ticked by on the old clock hanging above the coffee shop counter. Mrs. Chen hummed quietly while organizing cups behind the register. Mr. Peterson turned pages of his newspaper with careful precision. The rain continued its gentle drumming against the windows. But in the space between Jake's corner table and Luna's chosen spot, something electric was building. Jake tried to return to his work, really tried. He clicked back to his design project and stared at the restaurant logo that still needed finishing. But his eyes kept drifting upward, drawn like magnets to Luna's unwavering gaze. Every time he looked up, she was still there, still watching, still completely unashamed about her interest in him. It should have felt uncomfortable or even creepy, but it didn't. There was nothing pushy or aggressive about her attention. It felt more like being studied by an artist who had found something worth capturing, something worth understanding. Jake had never been looked at that way before, like he was interesting enough to hold someone's complete focus. Luna reached into a large canvas bag beside her chair and pulled out a small sketchbook. Jake watched as she opened it to a fresh page and set it on the table in front of her. Then she looked at him again, and this time there was a question in her eyes. Not words, but definitely a question. "Are you okay with this? Will you let me?" Jake found himself nodding slightly, almost without meaning to. He wasn't sure what he was agreeing to, but something about Luna's quiet confidence made him want to trust her. She smiled then, just a small curve of her lips, and Jake felt something warm unfold in his chest that he had almost forgotten existed. She began to draw, her hand moving across the paper in quick, confident strokes, but she wasn't looking down at her sketch. Instead, she kept her eyes on Jake, occasionally glancing at the paper to guide her hand, then returning her attention to him. It was like she was memorizing his face, capturing not just what he looked like, but something deeper about who he was. Jake had never been drawn before. He had taken school photos and family pictures, but this was different. This felt personal and intimate in a way that made his cheeks grow warm. He could see Luna studying the line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the careful distance he maintained between himself and the world around him. For the first time in months, Jake became aware of how he must look to other people. His hoodie was faded and comfortable, but probably looked sloppy. His hair needed cutting and had been falling in his eyes for weeks. He hadn't been taking care of himself the way he used to, back when he cared about making good impressions. But Luna didn't seem bothered by any of that. If anything, she looked fascinated by what she was seeing. Her pencil moved across the paper with purpose and precision, and Jake found himself sitting up straighter without realizing it. Something about being seen so carefully made him want to be worth looking at. The sound of Luna's pencil on paper created a gentle rhythm that mixed with the coffee shop's evening sounds. Jake discovered that he could listen to her drawing while pretending to work on his laptop. It was oddly soothing, like background music designed specifically for his anxious mind. Mrs. Chen finished organizing behind the counter and retreated to the back room to start cleaning the espresso machine. Mr. Peterson folded his newspaper with a satisfied grunt and headed for the door, nodding goodbye to the nearly empty coffee shop. The bell chimed as he left, and suddenly Jake and Luna were alone except for the distant sounds of Mrs. Chen working in the back. The space between them seemed to shrink somehow, even though neither of them had moved. Without other people around, their silent connection felt more intense, more significant. Jake could hear Luna's quiet breathing, could see the way she occasionally tilted her head slightly when she was concentrating on a particular detail in her drawing. He found himself relaxing despite his nervousness. There was something deeply calming about being in Luna's presence. She didn't seem to need anything from him except permission to look, permission to capture whatever she was seeing in his face on her paper. After months of feeling like he needed to perform or explain himself or justify his existence, it was a relief to simply be observed without judgment. Jake's laptop screen had gone dark from lack of activity, but he didn't bother to wake it up. For the first time in a very long time, he was completely present in a moment instead of trying to escape from it. He could feel Luna's attention like sunlight on his skin, warm and patient and surprisingly healing. She paused in her drawing and looked at him with a different expression, something softer and more thoughtful. Jake had the strange feeling that she was seeing past his careful defenses, past the walls he had built to protect himself from getting hurt again. It should have terrified him, but instead it felt like coming home to a place he hadn't known he was looking for. Luna turned her sketchbook slightly so Jake could see what she had been creating. Even from across the coffee shop, he could tell that it was him, but not the version of himself he saw in mirrors. This version looked stronger somehow, more interesting, like someone worth knowing. She had captured something in his expression that he didn't recognize but desperately wanted to believe existed. She stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and unhurried. Jake's breath caught as he realized she was finally going to break the spell between them. Finally going to cross the space that had held them in perfect tension for the past half hour. Luna walked toward his corner table with the same quiet confidence she had shown all evening, her sketchbook held carefully in her hands like an offering. Luna stopped halfway to Jake's table, and for a moment that felt like forever, they just looked at each other across the quiet coffee shop. The distance between them seemed both enormous and tiny at the same time. Jake could see every detail of her face now, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she was thinking, the small freckle just above her left eyebrow, the genuine warmth that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fireplace. His laptop was still closed in front of him, and Jake realized that shutting it had been like waving a white flag. He had surrendered without even meaning to, and somehow Luna had understood exactly what that gesture meant. There was no going back to pretending he wasn't interested, no returning to his careful isolation, now that he had acknowledged her presence so completely. "I hope you don't mind," Luna said softly, her voice carrying easily across the empty coffee shop. "I'm not usually this forward, but there was something about you that I couldn't ignore." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. When was the last time someone had said there was something about him worth noticing? When was the last time he had felt like anything other than a person taking up space in the world, trying to stay invisible until the pain passed? "I don't mind," he managed to say, his voice rougher than he intended. The words felt rusty from months of only speaking when absolutely necessary. I'm not used to being seen." Luna's expression softened even more, if that was possible. She took another step closer, and Jake could smell that faint scent of vanilla and paint again, mixed now with the warm aroma of her coffee. "Maybe that's exactly why you need to be," she said gently. She held up her sketchbook, showing him the drawing she had been working on. Jake had glimpsed it from across the room, but seeing it up close took his breath away completely. It was definitely him, but Luna had captured something he didn't recognize in his own face. The person in her drawing looked thoughtful and kind, with eyes that held depth and stories worth hearing. He looked like someone who mattered. "Is this really how you see me?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is how you actually are," Luna replied without hesitation. "Sometimes we need other people to show us what we look like when we're not trying so hard to disappear." Jake stared at the drawing, feeling something crack open inside his chest. For months he had been carrying around an image of himself as broken, as someone who had failed at love and couldn't be trusted with another person's heart. But Luna's sketch showed him a different possibility, a version of himself that existed beyond his mistakes and disappointments. "Can I sit down?" Luna asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from his corner table. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. Luna settled into the chair with the same easy grace she seemed to bring to everything she did. Up close, Jake could see that her sweater was hand-knitted, probably by someone who cared about her. There were tiny paint stains under her fingernails in blues and greens and yellow, like she had been working on something beautiful earlier that day. "I teach art to middle school kids," Luna explained, following his gaze to her paint-stained fingers. "Today we were working on landscapes, and let me tell you, 12-year-olds have very strong opinions about what color grass should be." Jake found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. "I imagine they do. Did anyone choose purple?" "Of course. And orange. And one kid insisted that grass in space would be silver, so we went with it." Luna's eyes lit up when she talked about her students. That's the thing about art. There's no wrong way to see the world, only different ways to show what you see. Something about the way she said it made Jake think she wasn't just talking about grass colors and space landscapes. "Is that why you drew me? Because you saw something different?" Luna was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "I've been coming here for about a month," she said finally. "And every time I come in, you're sitting right here in this corner, looking like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I kept thinking about what it would take to make you smile, what your face would look like if someone told you that you matter." Jake felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He hadn't cried in months, had trained himself not to feel things too deeply because it hurt too much. But Luna's words were unraveling something inside him that he had wrapped up tight and hidden away. "I haven't felt like I matter in a very long time," he admitted, the honesty surprising him. "Well, you do," Luna said simply. "You matter to Mrs. Chen, who always makes sure your coffee is perfect even when you don't talk to her. You matter to Mr. Peterson, who told me once that seeing you here every night makes him feel less alone. And you matter to me, even though we just met properly 5 minutes ago." Jake wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the tears but unable to stop them. "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Luna said softly. "I know you come here every night because home feels too quiet. I know you order the same thing, because making decisions feels hard when you're sad. I know you sit in this corner because it feels safe, but also because you're hoping someone will notice you anyway." Each word hit Jake like a gentle truth he hadn't known he needed to hear. Luna was describing his life with an accuracy that should have felt invasive, but instead felt like being understood for the first time in forever. "How do you know all that?" he asked. Luna smiled sadly. "Because I've been there too. Different corner, different coffee shop, different city, but the same feeling of being lost and hoping someone will help you find your way back to yourself." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the coffee shop settling into evening quiet around them. Mrs. Chen emerged from the back room and began wiping down tables, humming softly and giving them their space. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked with water that caught the warm light from inside. Jake felt something shifting inside himself, like pieces of a puzzle clicking back into place. For months he had been convinced that he was better off alone, that connecting with people would only lead to more pain. But sitting across from Luna, seeing himself through her eyes, he remembered what it felt like to be human in the best possible way. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Luna tore a small piece of paper from the back of her sketchbook and wrote something on it. She slid it across the table to Jake with a smile that made his heart skip. "Now you decide if you're ready to stop hiding." Jake stared at the small piece of paper Luna had slid across the table. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "Riverside Art Gallery, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Come find me if you're brave enough." Below that was a simple drawing of a small heart with wings, like something a child might doodle in the margins of a school notebook. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the paper. The invitation felt heavier than it should have, loaded with possibilities that both excited and terrified him. After months of avoiding any situation that might require emotional risk, Luna was asking him to step completely outside his comfort zone. "It's the opening night for a local artist showcase," Luna explained, watching his face carefully. "I have 3 paintings in the show. Nothing fancy, just things I've been working on in my spare time. But it would mean a lot to me if you came." Jake looked up from the paper to meet her eyes. "Why me? You could invite anyone. People who actually know about art. People who would appreciate what you've created." Luna leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but kind. "Because art isn't really about technique or knowledge. It's about connection. It's about one person sharing something real with another person who's willing to truly see it. And I think you know how to see things that other people miss." "I don't think I'm very good at connections anymore," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The last time I tried to get close to someone, it ended badly. Really badly. I'm not sure I know how to trust people or how to let them trust me." Luna was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "Can I tell you something?" she asked finally. "About a year ago, I was in a relationship with someone who made me feel like I was too much. Too loud, too messy, too interested in things he thought were silly. I started making myself smaller and quieter, trying to be the kind of person he could love." Jake felt a familiar ache in his chest. He knew exactly what she meant. "It took me months after we broke up to remember who I actually was," Luna continued. "I had to learn how to take up space again, how to trust my own feelings, how to believe that the right person would love me for being exactly who I am, not for who I could pretend to be." "How did you know when you were ready?" Jake asked. Luna smiled softly. "I painted a self-portrait, and for the first time in over a year I liked what I saw. Not because I was perfect, but because I was real. Because I was me, with all my weird interests and paint-stained clothes and tendency to talk to strangers in coffee shops." Jake found himself smiling despite his nervousness. "Is that one of the paintings in the show tomorrow?" "Maybe," Luna said with a mysterious look. You'll have to come and see for yourself." They talked for another hour as the coffee shop slowly prepared to close around them. Mrs. Chen wiped down the counter and stacked chairs on tables, but she left them alone, seeming to understand that something important was happening in the corner booth. Jake discovered that Luna was funny and thoughtful and completely genuine in a way that made him remember what it felt like to enjoy another person's company. When Mrs. Chen finally approached their table with an apologetic smile, Jake realized he didn't want the evening to end. For the first time in months, he had forgotten to watch the clock, forgotten to plan his escape route, forgotten to protect himself from feeling too much. "We should probably go," Luna said gently, gathering her sketchbook and canvas bag. "But I hope I'll see you tomorrow." Jake folded the small piece of paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet. "Can I ask you something? What if I come tomorrow and I'm not who you think I am? What if I'm actually as broken as I feel most of the time?" Luna stood up and looked down at him with an expression so full of understanding that it took his breath away. "Then you'll be exactly like the rest of us," she said simply. "Broken in some places, healing in others, doing our best to figure out how to be human." After Luna left, Jake sat alone in the coffee shop for a few more minutes, watching her walk down the rain-soaked street through the window. Mrs. Chen hummed quietly as she finished closing up, occasionally glancing over at him with a knowing smile. "She's special, that one," Mrs. Chen said as she turned off the espresso machine. "Been coming here for weeks, always asking about the young man in the corner who looks like he needs a friend." Jake felt his cheeks grow warm. "She asked about me?" "Every single time. Said she could tell you had a good heart. Just needed someone to remind you it was still beating." That night, Jake lay in his apartment staring at the ceiling, Luna's invitation on his nightstand. He thought about the drawing she had made of him, the version of himself that looked confident and interesting and worth knowing. He thought about her laugh and the way she talked about her students with such genuine affection. He thought about the choice she was offering him, the chance to stop hiding and start living again. The next evening, Jake stood outside the Riverside Art Gallery at exactly 7 o'clock. Through the large windows, he could see people moving around inside, looking at paintings and sculptures, holding glasses of wine and having animated conversations about color and light and meaning. It looked warm and inviting and completely terrifying. Jake's heart pounded as he reached for the door handle. Every instinct told him to turn around and go back to the safety of his corner table at Blue Moon Coffee Shop. But stronger than his fear was the memory of how Luna had looked at him, like he was someone worth seeing, someone worth knowing, someone worth waiting for. He pushed open the gallery door and stepped inside. The sounds of conversation and classical music washed over him, along with the smell of wine and the faint scent of vanilla perfume that he was already beginning to associate with possibility. Luna spotted him almost immediately from across the room. Her face lit up with a smile so bright and genuine that Jake felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for months. She excused herself from the group she was talking with and made her way through the crowd toward him. "You came," she said when she reached him, and Jake could hear real joy in her voice. "I decided to be brave," Jake replied, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Luna took his hand gently and led him deeper into the gallery. "Come on," she said. "I want to show you how the world looks when you're not afraid to be seen." And for the first time in a very long time, Jake followed,